The worst cruelties are never the dramatic ones. They are the small, accumulated indignities. The cold supper left without apology, the wage docked without explanation, the name spoken with a sneer so practiced it no longer requires effort. The rain had been falling since noon, and by the time the coaching road outside Ashford Crossing turned to brown soup, it had made up its mind to stay. Puddles swelled into pools. The elm trees along the Dorset Lane bowed under the weight of it, and the light that reached the valley floor arrived gray and thin, as though the sky had exhausted itself apologizing. Into this came a single horse and rider, moving at a pace that suggested neither urgency nor indifference, the deliberate pace of a man accustomed to arriving on his own terms, even when soaked through to the linen. He had given his name at the last toll gate as Mr. Gray. Not a lie, precisely. It was the name on his mother's side, the name he had used at university when he wanted a full night's sleep without men angling for introductions. The toll-keeper had taken his coin, glanced at the plain black coat and the mud-spattered boots, and waved him through without ceremony. Which was, he supposed, the point. The Crossed Keys Inn sat at the bottom of the valley like something that had been dropped there and found the arrangement agreeable. Its chimney breathed, its sign swung and complained in the wind. Through the single front window, firelight moved in amber smears, and the smell of wood smoke and boiled mutton reached him on the road a full 30 yards before he dismounted. He handed his horse to the boy at the stable door, paid him a shilling rather than a groat, not generosity, simply accuracy, since the animal had worked hard and the boy would work harder, and ducked inside. The common room of the Crossed Keys held 4 occupied tables, a fire that clearly considered itself the most important object in the room, and behind the worn pine counter, a woman writing in a ledger with a concentration so total she did not look up when the door banged open. He stood in the doorway for a moment. Most rooms rearranged themselves for him, whether or not he announced his name. Men straightened. Women found reasons to turn. It was one of the stranger taxes of rank, the constant performance of other people noticing you. The woman at the counter kept writing. He crossed to the bar. She held up one finger without raising her eyes, finished her line, inked a total into the column margin, and then looked up. She was perhaps 30. Dark circles under eyes that were nonetheless alert, watchful in the way that poverty makes eyes watchful, cataloging exits and opportunities simultaneously. Her hair was pinned back with the economy of someone who had stopped caring how it looked and started caring only that it stayed out of the way. She wore black still, though the black had faded at the cuffs to something closer to charcoal. A widow, then, and not a recent one. Recent grief still shows in the face. This woman's grief had been filed away somewhere and locked, because there was no time and no safe place to take it out. Supper and a room, he said. Single or shared? Single. That's 14 pence. Supper's included. Stabling is extra, if it's more than one night. She glanced past him toward the door. 1 horse? 1 horse. Then stabling's 3 pence per night. You'll want the room at the back. Front-facing one has a shutter that won't latch. Thank you, he said. He put down the coins without counting them from his palm, which was the gesture of a man who did not think much about 14 pence. She noticed. He saw her notice. She pulled the coins to her side of the counter without comment and resumed her ledger. Her name was Rhea. He would not know that for another hour. He learned it when the kitchen girl tripped on the flagstone step and sent a bowl of mutton stew skidding across the common room floor, and Rhea came from behind the counter at a pace that made it clear she had anticipated the particular incompetence involved and positioned herself accordingly. Bess, the flagstone. We discussed the flagstone. She was already crouching, collecting the bowl and its scattered contents with a practiced efficiency that suggested this was not the first such incident. Bring the cloth and stop crying. The floor has had worse. No. Bess, who was perhaps 15 and had clearly been crying not about the stew, but about something else entirely, produced a rag and crouched too, and for a moment, the two of them worked in parallel silence, the older woman's hands steady and matter-of-fact, and something in the girl's crying eased. Rhea, Bess said it quietly. Mrs. Aldred came round again today, while you were at the mill. Rhea did not pause in her cleaning. I know. She said if the rent isn't made up by the quarter day, she'll take the front room for her cousin. I know that too. Rhea stood. She took the soiled cloth and the empty bowl in one hand, touched the girl's shoulder once with the other, not the lingering touch of a woman with time for comfort, but the brief, firm touch of a woman communicating that things would be handled, and walked back to the kitchen without another word. He had been watching. He was not the kind of man who stared, but he was the kind of man who saw what was in front of him and did not pretend otherwise. The quarter day was 11 days away. He had not needed to know that to calculate it. The way Rhea had said she knew, twice, flat, without emphasis, told him she had been carrying the number since she first heard it. His own supper came to him at the corner table, the mutton stew, reconstituted with a second helping from the pot, bread that was yesterday's but sliced thick, a wedge of hard yellow cheese, and a small jug of the local ale, which turned out to be better than the establishment's exterior warranted. He ate with the focused silence of a man accustomed to eating alone, and at some point, Rhea materialized beside him and set down a second piece of bread without being asked. The first one was smaller than usual, she said. The bread. I noticed no deficiency. I did. She picked up his empty ale jug. Another? Please. She refilled it herself, rather than sending Bess, which meant she was either watching him or had decided he was worth the attention. He suspected the latter, and that the watchfulness was not personal interest, but the professional vigilance of a woman running an establishment alone who needed to identify early which guests would cause problems before they had the chance to. He finished his supper. The common room thinned. Outside, the rain had not stopped. It had merely shifted from aggressive to resigned, a steady, soft percussion against the shutters. The fire burned down to orange coals, and 2 of the 4 tables emptied. Rhea was back behind her counter, back in her ledger. The candle she was working by was a stub, less than half an inch of tallow remaining. He watched her tilt the page to catch the light, adjust, tilt again. He could have said nothing. He was passing through. He was Mr. Gray, a plain traveler with mud on his boots, and tomorrow morning he would pay his bill and continue north, toward the estate he had been away from for 9 months, and which would, he had no doubt, require his attention in every way. A large and complicated thing requires attention after neglect. Instead, he said, from across the room, there are 2 candles on the mantelpiece behind you. She looked up, looked at the mantelpiece, looked back at her ledger. I know. The stub you're using will last another quarter of an hour at most. A pause. She was tallying. He could tell from the slight stillness of her pen hand. Therefore tomorrow, she said. It was not a refusal of charity. It was an explanation of a system. She had rationed the candles, as she had rationed everything else, according to a calculus he was not party to, and had no standing to override. Of course, he said. He went to bed. He did not sleep immediately. He lay in the back room with its small window rattling in its frame and listened to the rain, and thought about the way she had said, I know, twice, to Bess. The way she had touched the girl's shoulder. The way she had brought him a second piece of bread not as a kindness, but as a correction of a deficiency she had measured and found unacceptable. In the morning, she was already behind the counter when he came down. The ledger was closed. The candle stubs had been replaced. He could not tell with what, because the 2 candles from the mantelpiece were standing in their holders, burned down an inch, which meant she had worked past midnight. Breakfast was porridge with a pot of honey and a boiled egg. She set it down without ceremony. He ate. He should have paid his bill and left. His horse was rested. The rain had stopped overnight, leaving the road wet but navigable. He had, by his own estimate, 2 more days of riding to reach the estate, and a great deal of work waiting there. He paid his bill. He walked to the stable. He stood with his hand on the saddle for a long moment. He came back inside. The woman you mentioned, he said to Bess, who was sweeping the front step. Mrs. Aldred. Bess looked up, looked behind him, presumably for Rhea. Yes, sir? She owns this building? Owns the block, sir. All 4 properties on the lower lane. The rent in arrears. How much? Bess blinked. I don't know exactly, sir. Mrs. Fennis, Rhea, she doesn't talk about the books with me. But you know there is an arrears. 3 months, I think, sir. Possibly 4. Rhea's voice came from the interior. Bess. Flat, certain. Bess looked at her broom. Rhea appeared in the doorway. She looked at him with the steady, assessing regard she had deployed on him the night before, except now there was a quality to it that he recognized, the look of a woman who has just been assessed herself, without her permission, and has decided how she feels about that. "Mr. Gray," she said. "Mrs. Fennis, you paid your bill." "I did. Your horse is in the stable." "Also true." A pause. The late morning light was thin and clean after the rain, and it fell across the lane and the front step and her face, without flattery or mercy, and he thought that she looked, in that light, like a woman who had been beautiful, before exhaustion had made beauty and irrelevance and competence the only currency that mattered. "If you have a question," she said, "ask it plainly." He liked that. He liked it considerably. "I have a proposition," he said, "not a charitable one, a transactional one. I have business in Ashford Crossing for 2 more days. I require a reliable base of operations. I will pay for the room for 2 additional nights at twice the posted rate, which should, I think, address a portion of your current difficulty with Mrs. Aldred." She did not react immediately. She was calculating. He could see it. "That's 56 pence, she said. "Yes. Why twice the rate?" "Because the room is worth it, and I have no interest in paying less than something is worth." Another pause. Longer. The lane was quiet. Somewhere down the road a cart was moving, its wheels sucking at the mud. "I'll have Bess put fresh water in the room," Rhea said, and walked back inside. He allowed himself, briefly, to feel something approaching satisfaction. Then, he went to retrieve his horse. The business in Ashford Crossing was, on its face, unremarkable. He called on 2 men whose names appeared in a ledger he had received from his solicitor in London, a Mr. Crail, who held a mortgage on 3 tenant farms that adjoined his estate's southern boundary, and a Mr. Voss, who was the local magistrate and whose handling of a disputed right-of-way had raised certain questions. Mr. Crail was florid and expansive, a man who dealt in false warmth as his primary social currency. He offered brandy at 10 in the morning and spoke at length about the difficulties of the current agricultural market, while his eyes did the steady, invisible work of trying to identify who, exactly, Mr. Gray was and what his presence signified. He was not told. Mr. Voss was a smaller variety of the same problem, a magistrate of 15 years standing who had grown accustomed to the administrative independence that comes with being the only source of official authority for 12 miles in any direction. He received Mr. Gray in his sitting room with a courtesy that had been calibrated to the half-degree for a man of commercial middling station. He was not told anything useful either. Both of them, as he left their respective premises, would spend the remainder of their afternoon in a condition of low-grade unease they could not quite explain. He returned to the Crossed Keys at 4:30. The common room held 3 tables of late-afternoon drinkers, a dog sleeping under the fire bench, and a woman he had not seen before, tall, dressed in the particular way of someone who believes that expensive fabric excuses unpleasant manners, standing at the counter and speaking to Rhea in a voice designed to carry. "I have been more than patient," the woman was saying, "and patience is not my natural disposition, Mrs. Fennis, as I believe you are aware." "I am aware, Mrs. Aldred," Rhea's voice, flat, precise. 3 months becomes 4, next Thursday. 4 months becomes grounds for removal. I did not purchase this property to support a widow's sentimentality about her late husband's enterprise. I did not ask you to. No, but you ask me, implicitly, every time you fail to meet your payment. My cousin has need of the premises. She is a practical woman, unlike yourself, and she will run this establishment at a profit rather than a memorial. Not a flinch, not a visible reaction of any kind. He had reached the corner of the room by now, near enough to see Rhea's face, and what was in it was not resignation or grief or anger. What was in it was the flat, controlled expression of a woman who has decided that no feeling she experiences in this room, in front of this woman, will be visible. "The quarter day is Thursday," Rhea said. "It is. I will have the payment." Mrs. Aldred smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. All 4 months. The sum, by his quick calculation, was somewhere between £2 and £3. He did not know the exact arrears. He did not need to. "Mrs. Aldred," his voice, from the corner, did not raise itself. It did not need to. The tall woman turned. He crossed the room. He was still in the plain black coat. He was still mud-splashed from the road. He was, as far as anyone in this room knew, a commercial traveler named Gray, and he let that impression stand for exactly 3 more seconds while he reached Mrs. Aldred's eyeline and held it. Her expression shifted. It was a small shift, the kind that happens below the level of conscious choice. The instinctive recalibration of a person who has just registered that something about the thing in front of them does not correspond to the category they had assigned it. "The debt," he said. "What is the precise sum?" It was not a question. Mrs. Aldred recovered herself. "I beg your pardon, sir, but this is a private matter between myself and the sum." A pause. In the common room, the 3 tables had gone quiet, in the way that rooms go quiet when a large thing has changed and no one has yet made sense of it. £2, 14 shillings and 6pence, Mrs. Aldred said, and had the grace to look, briefly, as though she regretted providing the precision. He reached into his coat. He placed £3 on the counter. "That covers the arrears," he said. "The remaining balance to be applied to the next quarter. Mrs. Aldred, I believe you'll want to provide a receipt." She stared at him. "A receipt," he said again, with the patient, unhurried certainty of a man who has said a thing once already and considers saying it a second time sufficient. Mrs. Aldred wrote the receipt. Her hand was not entirely steady. She took the coins with a smile that no longer resembled warmth, said something brief and largely incoherent about Thursday, and left. The common room began, cautiously, to breathe again. Rhea had not moved from behind the counter. She looked at him with an expression he could not immediately categorize. Not gratitude, not relief, nothing so soft or so simple. Something harder and more complicated. The expression of a woman who has had the ground shifted under her feet and is deciding, very carefully, how to stand on the new surface. "That was my debt," she said. "It was. You had no standing to pay it. I had £3. That is not the same thing." "No," he agreed, "it isn't." A silence. The dog under the fire bench shifted and resettled. "I will repay it," Rhea said. "Every penny." "I know." He did know. It was as certain as anything he had assessed in the past 2 days. He went upstairs. He did not look back. He did not look behind him at the counter, did not look at the door through which Mrs. Aldred had exited, did not look at the 3 tables of men who were now talking in low tones about what they had just seen. He sat in his room for a long time and thought about nothing in particular. Or rather, he thought about the precise way she had said "I know," not as relief, as commitment. Dinner that night came to his table with unusual care. The mutton had been replaced by a cut of braised beef he was reasonably certain had not been on the regular menu. The bread was fresh, and there was a small glass of something amber that turned out to be a decent port. He looked up. She was already gone. He ate. He finished the port. He left the next morning before dawn, as planned. He paid Bess the balance of his second night, added a shilling for the breakfast he would not take, and walked to the stable where his horse was already saddled, which meant Rhea had told the boy the previous night. She was at the counter when he passed through the common room. The ledger was open. The candle was a full one. "Mr. Gray," she said without looking up. "Mrs. Fennis. The road to the north will be soft for another mile past the crossing. Stay to the right-hand verge." He stopped. "Thank you." She wrote a number, inked it, set her pen down and looked up with the clear, direct attention she brought to everything she looked at. "You are not Mr. Gray," she said. He waited. "I don't know who you are," she said, "and I find I don't require the information. But you are not Mr. Gray." He put on his hat. "Stay to the right-hand verge," he said. "Good advice. I'll follow it." He rode out. The estate was called Veln. It sat on the northern rise above the valley, with the settled authority of a thing that has been in one place long enough to stop justifying itself. 2,000 acres, 11 tenant farms. A house of 40-odd rooms that had been managed, in his absence, by a steward named Pritchett, who was competent, correct, and deeply devoted to the principle that things should remain exactly as they were. He spent the first week reading ledgers. 9 months of accounts, tenant rolls, repair logs, correspondence. Pritchett hovered at a respectful distance, providing annotation when requested. On the fourth day he found the discrepancy. It was not large, as such things go. It was not the kind of outright theft that announces itself. It was the kind of accumulated shaving, a percentage here, a rounding there, a repair cost inflated by a margin small enough to escape a casual audit, that compounds quietly over years into something significant. He did the arithmetic. Over the 9-month period, the sum was £83, 14 shillings. Over the preceding 2 years before that, by extrapolation, something in the range of £200. He set the ledger on the desk. He looked at it for a long moment. He sent a message to Pritchett, asking him to present himself the following morning. He sent a second message to his solicitor in London. He wrote a brief note to a colleague at the County Sessions Court, and a somewhat longer note to the same magistrate, Mr. Voss, whose right-of-way matter had resolved itself in an instructive direction once certain documents were reviewed. Then he sat in the study, which smelled of beeswax and old paper and the particular dusty warmth of rooms that have been closed against the world, and thought about £3 on a pine counter, and a woman who said she would repay every penny, with the tone of someone stating a mathematical fact. 12 days after his return to Veln, the matter of Pritchett was settled, not violently, not dramatically. There was a meeting in the study, a review of the figures, an acknowledgement that became eventually unavoidable when faced with the documentary evidence laid side by side. Pritchett did not confess exactly. He produced explanations that dissolved under examination like paper in water. The sum was established. The legal path was made clear. A private settlement was reached. The return of the extracted sum from a property Pritchett owned in his wife's name, signed over quietly, to avoid the longer, louder, and considerably more ruinous alternative. It took 11 days. Clean, definitive, no shouting, no scene. On the 12th day, he sent a letter to Ashford Crossing. It was addressed to Mrs. Rhea Fennis, proprietress, the Crossed Keys Inn. It was 3 sentences. The first sentence informed her that the loan of £3 had been made as a personal rather than commercial arrangement, and that he did not require repayment. The second sentence acknowledged that she would disregard this and repay it anyway, and stated that when she did, the repayment would be received. The third sentence said that he intended to pass through Ashford Crossing again, on the 1st of the following month, and would be grateful for the corner table. He signed it with his full name. Not Gray. He imagined her reading it. He imagined the particular quality of stillness that would precede her setting the letter down and resuming whatever she was doing. He did not allow himself to imagine much beyond that, because he was a man who had learned, at some cost, the foolishness of projecting onto women the responses one hoped for, rather than the responses they would actually produce. He waited. On the 28th day, a letter arrived at Veln. It was addressed to the Duke of Ashenmere, which was correct, and which told him she had asked someone in Ashford Crossing who Mr. Gray was, or had simply known already, and waited for him to say so. The letter contained a single folded sheet, and on the sheet, a money order for £3. No note, no salutation, no signature. He sat with it for a long time. Then he laughed, quietly, alone in the study, which was not a common event. On the 1st of the month he rode south. The road was dry by then. Autumn was beginning to make its argument, the hedgerows beginning their annual translation from green to rust and gold, the air carrying that specific cold bright quality of mornings that know the year is turning. He rode at a moderate pace, and permitted himself to notice things. A flock of starlings moving in a shape that had no name, a farm wife hanging linen on a gate, the way the light sat on the wet fields in the early hours like something contemplating departure. He arrived at the Crossed Keys at mid-morning, tied his horse at the post himself, walked in. She was at the counter. The ledger was open. She looked up. "Your Grace," she said, not ironically, not as performance, simply the correct form of address, stated plainly, from a woman who said things plainly. "Mrs. Fennis, the corner table is available." "Thank you." He sat. She brought coffee rather than ale, which suggested she had thought about it. He drank it. The common room was quiet in the mid-morning lull. Bess was visible through the kitchen doorway. working at something with a focus that suggested she had been instructed to find reasons to be in the kitchen. After a time, Ria came from behind the counter and sat down across from him. Not beside him, across from him, in the direct regard of a woman who does not position herself at a social disadvantage in her own establishment. "You should have told me," she said. "I should have," he agreed. "It would have changed nothing in what I asked of you. But it would have changed my ability to make an informed judgment of the situation. That's precisely why I didn't." She considered this. It was not acceptance what she offered him, but it was consideration, which was more useful. "Mrs. Aldred has sent a letter," Ria said. 3 letters, in fact, inquiring as to the nature of your connection to this establishment and whether certain allowances on the lease might be renegotiated. I expect she has. She referenced the Duke of Ashenmere by name. Your name. A pause. She was considerably warmer in the reference than she has been in person. He said nothing. "I burned them," Ria said. "The letters. That's your right." "It is." She looked at him with that clear, steady, assessing attention. "I want to understand what you want, Your Grace. Not what you're willing to provide. What you want from this." He had been asked variations of this question before, usually in the language of property settlements and marriage contracts, the question posed by fathers or solicitors with the texture of negotiation. He had never been asked it quite so directly, by the person herself, with no intermediary and no softening. "I want to come back," he said, "not as a patron, as a person. I want to know you better than I do. I want to sit at this table and eat the bread you judge sufficient, and drink the coffee you've decided is appropriate for the hour, and I want to earn your good opinion." He paused. "I am not offering rescue. You don't require rescue. You require, as far as I can observe, nothing from any person except occasionally a decent candle." Something crossed her face, not quite a smile, something in the neighborhood. "You are a difficult man to read," she said. I've been told the same about myself." "I know." He met her eyes. "I find it restful." She was quiet for a long moment. Outside, a cart went by on the lane, its wheels rumbling on the dried ruts. The fire in the hearth added its small, steady commentary. "There is a thing I should tell you," Ria said, "about this establishment, about how I came to run it. Only if you want to." "I want to." She folded her hands on the table, looked at them for a moment, then back at him. "My husband, Daniel, was not the proprietor when I married him. His father was. Daniel was the second son. He was supposed to enter the church. He was a good man, better than suited him for either commerce or clergy, and when his father died and his brother refused the inheritance, he took the inn because someone had to. He died 3 years ago of a fever that came on in January and was done with him by February." She said this without inflection, as a person states a fact they have stated before, to others, in the necessary recitations of paperwork and explanation. "I had 6 months of knowing what I was doing before I had to do it entirely alone. I have been doing it alone since." He said nothing. He had learned, at some point in his life, that silence given to a person who is offering you something real is the appropriate response. "I am telling you this," Ria said, "because you told me something about yourself indirectly, by not lying, exactly, but by not saying, 'I am paying the debt in kind.' That's fair." She looked at the window. "I don't know what I think about you, Your Grace. I know that I think about you, which is different from most people who pass through this room. It's different for me as well," he said. She stood, not with dismissal, with decision. "I have work to do. I know. The corner table is yours for as long as you require it." A pause. "I'll bring you dinner at 6. The roast is better than the mutton." "I'll be here at 6. She walked back to her counter, picked up her pen, and resumed her ledger. He watched her for a moment, the bent head, the steady hand, the absolute self-possessed efficiency of a person who had built a life out of precision and refusal, and was, with some caution, deciding whether to admit one more thing into it. He spent the afternoon walking the town. He visited the solicitor who handled property in the lower lane, not on behalf of himself, but because it had occurred to him that the ownership structure of Mrs. Aldred's 4 properties had a certain vulnerability to legal scrutiny, that Mr. Voss, in his newly cooperative mood, might find professionally interesting. He made no decisions. He asked questions. He reviewed a document that had been filed in 1847 concerning easement rights on the lower lane and noted 2 discrepancies that would require further attention. He returned at 6. The dinner was, as Rhea had promised, better than the mutton. Braised beef with root vegetables, a good gravy, bread that was clearly today's. She did not sit with him at dinner, which was not a withdrawal. She had an establishment to run. But twice she passed by his table for reasons that were not strictly necessary. And once she refilled his water without being asked, and when their eyes met across the room, neither of them looked away immediately. After dinner, when the tables were clearing, she came and sat across from him again with a small glass of the port and one for herself, which he noted and did not remark upon. "Bess tells me you asked about Mrs. Aldred," she said. "I did. She also tells me you did something today with Mr. Harker, the solicitor." Word travels quickly. It does in Ashford Crossing. There are approximately 43 people who consider the running of this establishment their personal concern. She looked at him with an expression he was beginning to learn to read, that expression that sat between challenge and consideration. "I don't want you to fight my battles, Your Grace." "I know that." "Then what are you doing?" "Looking at a legal document," he said, "that has implications for 12 different properties on the lower lane, including 3 that belong to tenant farmers whose rents I collect. It's within my legitimate interest to understand the easement structure." She looked at him for a long moment. "That is technically accurate," she said. "Yes, and almost entirely beside the point." "Also yes." He met her eyes. "I won't pretend I have no interest in the outcome. I have a direct interest, but the work itself is legitimate. What happens as a result of it will be legally founded and publicly documented. Mrs. Aldred will have every right to contest it if she chooses, and if the law determines she has no case, that will be the law's determination, not mine." Rhea turned her glass once in her hands. "You are a man," she said, "who is accustomed to having the authority to act. I am. I am a woman who is accustomed to having no one act on her behalf." "I know. Then you understand that what I require from you is not to act for me." She set down her glass with a precise, definitive click. "What I require is to act alongside me, as a person who is informed, and who informs me in turn, not a patron, not a benefactor." He felt something in his chest that was not familiar and was not unpleasant. "A partner," he said. She did not say yes. What she did was look at him with an attention that was different from the professional assessment of the first night, different from the calculating regard of their later conversations. It was the attention of a person who has made a decision they had not fully made before and are checking, one last time, whether the ground will hold. "There is a practical matter," she said. "There are usually several. I run an inn. You are a duke. These are not naturally adjacent situations." "No," he agreed. "They require deliberate construction." "I am," she said carefully, "a practical person. I am aware of that. It is one of approximately 11 things about you that I find—" He paused, selecting the word, "compelling." She looked at him. He looked back. Outside, the autumn evening was settling over Ashford Crossing with the quiet authority of things that don't require permission. The fire in the hearth had found its evening stride. Bess was singing something tuneless in the kitchen, the sound of it warm and domestic and slightly off-key. Rhea said, "The corner table will be held for you." "I'll be back Thursday," he said. "I know," she said. She stood, picked up her port glass and his, and walked back behind the counter. She did not look back. She did not need to. He sat in the corner for a moment longer. The room was warm and close, and smelled of wood smoke and dinner, and the particular human warmth of a room that has been lived in and worked in and grieved in, and kept running through all of it. He thought about the word he had used, partner. He thought about how she had not said no, and how the absence of no, from a woman who said everything plainly, was a thing that had a specific weight and specific meaning. He put on his coat. He said goodnight to Bess, who was sweeping the threshold, and who went pink with surprise at being directly addressed by a duke. Outside, the night air was cold and clean. His horse was waiting. The lane was dark and quiet, the elm trees black against a sky that had finally decided on stars. Perhaps you have known a person like Ria, someone who has carried so much, for so long, that they have forgotten what it felt like to put anything down. And perhaps you have wondered what it takes, exactly, to remind such a person that strength and solitude are not the same thing. It does not take a rescue. It does not take a grand declaration or an overwhelming of defenses. It takes a man who brings nothing but his honest attention, and a woman who is brave enough to call that what it is. It takes both of them in the end, choosing the work of it, sitting across a table in a warm room, in a town with 43 invested observers, and deciding that what they are building is not charity, and not gratitude, and not rescue, but something altogether more durable. He would be back Thursday. She already knew it, and that, for two people who had both, in their different ways, stopped expecting things to hold, was enough, more than enough. It was everything.